The oppressive humidity of the afternoon hung thick and heavy in the air, a silent, unseen blanket. I sat on my porch swing, the gentle creak of the chains a familiar rhythm, a lullaby of peace I'd finally found. The sun dipped lower, casting long, golden shadows across the meticulously manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates, painting the world in hues of orange and purple. A tall glass of iced tea sat on the small table beside me, condensation beating down its side, a testament to the warmth. It was moments like these I had dreamed of, quiet and uncomplicated, a stark contrast to the thundering chaos that had defined too many of my past years. My eyes were closed, a faint smile playing on my lips, soaking in the tranquility. Then, the calm shattered. A sharp, almost theatrical cough broke through the evening quiet. I opened my eyes slowly, the peaceful scene still a blur for a moment. Standing at the edge of my porch, her hands rigidly clasped in front of her, was Brenda Sterling. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, usually a symbol of her ironclad control, seemed to bristle with indignation. Her floral dress, expensive and understated, couldn't hide the rigid set of her shoulders, or the tight, thin line of her lips. She looked as though she had just sucked on a lemon, and somehow, the lemon was my fault. "Mr. Peterson," she announced, her voice cutting through the twilight like a freshly sharpened knife, "we need to have a serious conversation about your continued defiance." I sighed, pushing myself up slightly in the swing. "Good evening, Brenda." "Defiance? I'm just enjoying the sunset. Is that now against the rules?" I tried to keep my tone light, but a familiar weariness had begun to settle in my chest. Her presence always brought a gray cloud to the brightest day. She stepped closer, her expensive loafers clicking ominously on the flagstone path. "Your presence on this porch, Mr. Peterson, particularly with that unauthorized fixture," she gestured dismissively at my swing, "is a direct affront to the aesthetic harmony of Willow Creek Estates. You have been formally notified. Repeatedly. And frankly, your continued public display of disregard is unacceptable. You need to vacate this property immediately, and cease all such activities. This porch is not a free-for-all." My smile faded. "Brenda, this is my porch. And this is my porch swing. It's not unauthorized, it's not disrupting anything, and I certainly don't need your permission to sit on my own property." The setting sun glinted off her stern expression, making her seem less a neighborhood busybody and more a cartoon villain. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. "This is not up for debate, Mr. Peterson. The board has spoken. If you do not comply, further action will be taken. And I assure you, you do not want to know what further action entails." She straightened her posture, puffing out her chest slightly, as if daring me to challenge her. She thought she had me cornered, that her words were the final hammer blow. But then, a low rumble vibrated through the ground, growing steadily louder. It wasn't the sound of a regular car. It was deeper, more substantial, like a large animal approaching. Brenda paused, her carefully constructed authority faltering for a split second as her head tilted, trying to identify the noise. The rumbling intensified, and a large, dark, unassuming Ford Expedition, the kind often used by government agencies or special forces, turned the corner and glided silently down the street, slowing as it approached my house. It was tinted completely black, every window opaque, hiding whoever was inside. It didn't look like any vehicle in Willow Creek. Brenda's brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. She probably assumed it was a delivery or a new neighbor, someone she could immediately size up and categorize. But the expedition didn't drive past. It pulled directly into my driveway, stopping with a soft hiss of its brakes, its powerful engine idling quietly. The front passenger door opened first, then the rear passenger door on the same side. 3 figures emerged, silhouetted against the fading light. They were tall, broad-shouldered men, moving with a quiet, almost military precision. Their civilian clothes, dark, well-fitting t-shirts, cargo pants, and sturdy boots, couldn't disguise the coiled power in their frames. They carried themselves with an effortless confidence, their gazes sweeping the street before settling on my porch. And on Brenda. Brenda, who had been mid-sentence, about to unleash another volley of threats, suddenly stopped. Her mouth, which had been open, simply hung there. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, fixated on the men. Her color drained from her face, leaving her pale and sickly looking. The earlier arrogance vanished, replaced by a dawning, terrible fear. She had expected me to fold, to cower, to apologize. She had expected to win. But as the trio of formidable men strode purposefully towards my porch, their presence casting long, intimidating shadows across Brenda's perfectly manicured petunias, a chilling realization dawned on her face. She had no idea who she was truly dealing with, or the quiet storm she had just unleashed. My name is David Peterson, and just 6 months ago, I thought I had found my slice of heaven. After years of serving in the United States Marine Corps, navigating the dusty, dangerous streets of faraway lands, hearing the constant roar of engines and the sharp crack of gunfire, all I craved was quiet. Peace. A place where the biggest decision of my day would be what to have for dinner, not which route to take to avoid an IED. The noise and chaos of conflict had etched themselves deep into my bones, and my soul longed for stillness. I'd seen too much, done too much, and earned my right to a bit of mundane serenity. The transition from military life to civilian life is often portrayed as a struggle, a difficult bridge to cross. For me, it wasn't the job hunt or the social reintegration that worried me. It was the internal adjustment, quieting the constant vigilance, learning to simply be without a mission or an immediate threat. My dream was simple, a small house with a yard, maybe a porch, in a quiet neighborhood. A place where I could heal, where I could breathe, and where I could finally, truly relax. I spent weeks searching online, driving through countless suburbs, trying to find that perfect balance of affordability, safety, and a sense of community. When I stumbled upon Willow Creek Estates, it felt like fate. The online pictures showed tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed hedges, and friendly-looking families pushing strollers. It promised a tranquil escape, a haven from the world I had known. The real estate agent, a jovial woman named Sarah who seemed genuinely excited about the community, painted an even rosier picture. Willow Creek is more than just houses, David, she'd chirped, showing me around the model home. It's a lifestyle. A real sense of belonging. The HOA ensures everything stays beautiful and everyone gets along. It's like a big family. I remember chuckling then, thinking about the big family I'd left behind in the Corps. That was a family forged in fire, bound by shared hardship and unwavering loyalty. This civilian family seemed to be bound by lawn regulations and paint swatch approvals. Still, the allure of tranquility was strong. The house itself was modest but charming, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a small, inviting porch that immediately captured my imagination. I pictured myself there, sipping coffee in the mornings, reading in the afternoons, just existing. The buying process was surprisingly smooth. The paperwork, though extensive, was manageable. I signed dozens of documents, including a hefty packet detailing the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association rules and regulations. I skimmed it, as most people do. Standard stuff, I figured. Keep your lawn tidy, don't paint your house purple, no junk cars in the driveway. All seemed reasonable. I wanted a nice neighborhood, after all. Who wouldn't want to live in a place where people took pride in their homes? I was eager to get the keys and start building my new life, so I didn't pore over every single clause, every minute detail. I trusted the implied promise of a peaceful, well-maintained community. Moving day was a blur of boxes and sweat. My few civilian friends, mostly people I'd met during brief leaves or through my family, helped me unload. We laughed, we ordered pizza, and for the first time in years, I felt a lightness in my chest that had nothing to do with adrenaline or the absence of a heavy pack. My first act after all the boxes were inside was to set up the porch swing. It wasn't fancy, just a simple wooden swing painted a soft sage green, with thick, sturdy ropes. It was a housewarming gift from my parents, who knew my dream of a quiet porch. Hanging it was a small victory, a symbol of permanence. Life in Willow Creek started exactly as I hoped. The mornings were filled with the chirping of birds and the distant hum of lawnmowers. I took long walks, exploring the winding streets, admiring the different architectural styles, and often waving to neighbors tending their gardens. Most people returned the wave, some offered a friendly nod. There was a quiet hum of activity, but it was a gentle hum, not the jarring cacophony I was used to. I spent my days reading, working on small woodworking projects in my garage, and rediscovering simple joys like cooking for myself without the rush of a mess hall. I tried to be a good neighbor. When Mrs. Henderson, an elderly lady with a perpetually sunny disposition, dropped her groceries on the sidewalk one afternoon, I was there in an instant, helping her gather her scattered apples and canned goods. She thanked me profusely, her eyes twinkling. "You're a real gem, young man," she'd said, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Not many like you around anymore." Another time, a small terrier mix, clearly lost, wandered into my yard. I managed to coax him closer, found the number on his tag, and reunited him with a frantic little girl a few streets over. Her tearful hug and her mother's grateful relief filled me with a quiet satisfaction. These small acts of kindness, simple gestures that cost me nothing but a few minutes of my time, made me feel connected, a part of something larger than myself in a way that didn't involve uniforms or orders. My first encounter with the formal side of Willow Creek Estates, outside of signing the paperwork, was a week after I moved in. A crisp, official-looking envelope appeared in my mailbox, emblazoned with the HOA logo. My heart gave a tiny lurch, a habit from military life, where official envelopes rarely brought good news. Inside was a polite, almost apologetic notice. It stated that my front lawn, while generally well-maintained, was approximately 0.5 inches above the permissible height for grass within the community guidelines. It gently requested I rectify the situation within 72 hours to avoid a minor administrative fee. I stared at the letter, then at my lawn. It looked perfectly fine to me, maybe a touch shaggy in one corner. I chuckled. Half an inch? Really? I'd faced far more pressing deadlines. I mowed the lawn that afternoon. It was a minor inconvenience, easily dismissed. I wanted to be a good resident, and if cutting my grass an extra half-inch was the biggest hurdle, I figured I was in for a smooth ride. Then came the recycling bin notice. Mine was slightly visible from the street if you stood at a certain angle and squinted. The notice, again polite, suggested that it be stored out of sight behind the side gate, to maintain community aesthetics. Again, I complied. It felt a bit nitpicky, but harmless. I was settling in, and these were just the quirks of suburban life, I told myself. A small price to pay for peace. My first direct encounter with Brenda Sterling happened at the quarterly HOA meeting. I went out of curiosity, and a sense of civic duty. The community center was packed, folding chairs set up in neat rows. Brenda sat at the head table, flanked by two other board members who seemed to exist solely to nod in agreement with her pronouncements. She was in her element, directing the flow of the meeting with the precision of a seasoned general, though her battlefield was flowerbeds and fence heights. She spoke with an air of absolute authority, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through any murmur of dissent. I learned quickly that she was the HOA president, and her word was effectively law in Willow Creek. She ran through agenda items, a new landscaping project, a discussion about holiday decorations, and then, a lengthy segment on community standards and compliance. During this segment, she lectured the room on the importance of adherence to rules, citing vague examples of flagrant violations and disregard for shared harmony. Her eyes occasionally swept over the room, lingering on certain individuals. I noticed Mrs. Henderson briefly flinch when Brenda mentioned unapproved garden gnomes. It was clear Brenda saw herself as the guardian of Willow Creek's perfection, and anyone who deviated, even slightly, was a threat to her carefully constructed utopia. I kept my head down, observing. She struck me as intensely proud of the community, almost possessive, but also a bit stifling. I remember thinking, she means well, probably, just a bit overzealous. I still had my military mindset of following orders, so I wasn't particularly bothered by her strictness, so long as it didn't impact me directly. I figured I was too small a fish in her perfect pond to draw her attention. I was wrong. The turning point came with the porch swing. My sage green swing, which had become my sanctuary, the place where I started and ended most of my days. It had brought me immense comfort, a quiet symbol of my newfound freedom and peace. I loved sitting there, watching the world go by, or simply closing my eyes and listening to the birds. One sunny Tuesday, I found another official-looking envelope in my mailbox. This one felt heavier. My heart did more than lurch this time, it dropped. The letter was from the HOA, signed by Brenda Sterling herself, and it wasn't polite. It was aggressive. The subject line screamed, urgent. Unauthorized fixture, immediate removal required. I tore it open, my brow furrowing as I read. The letter stated, in no uncertain terms, that my porch swing was an unapproved permanent fixture that detracted from the uniform architectural aesthetic of the property and the community at large. It cited a specific clause in the HOA bylaws, Section 4.3. B. Exterior alterations and additions, which, upon my subsequent frantic searching of the thick rulebook I had been given, seemed to be a wildly liberal interpretation, or perhaps an entirely fabricated one, designed to encompass anything Brenda personally disliked. The letter demanded the immediate removal of the porch swing within 48 hours. Not 72, not a week. 48. If not removed, a fine of $500 would be levied, followed by an escalating daily charge of $100 until compliance. It went on to threaten legal action, liens on my property, and even forced removal by an HOA contracted crew, with all costs borne by me. My hands clenched, crumpling the letter slightly. This wasn't a half-inch of grass. This wasn't a misplaced bin. This was personal. This was my porch, my swing, my sanctuary. It felt like an invasion, a deliberate attempt to chip away at the very peace I had worked so hard to find. The tone of the letter was accusatory, condescending, implying I was a rebel, a nuisance, an intentional rule-breaker. It stung. I had always been a man who followed rules, respected authority, and valued order. To be branded as defiant by Brenda Sterling, of all people, felt like a personal insult. I spent the rest of the day rereading the entire HOA rulebook, line by painstaking line, my frustration mounting with every passing minute. I found no clear, definitive mention of porch swings. Section 4.3.b talked about adding new structures, permanent landscaping, sheds, and exterior paint changes. A removable, hanging porch swing hardly fit that description. It was furniture, for crying out loud, not a new wing on the house. Her interpretation felt like a tyrannical overreach, a petty power play. I decided I wouldn't back down this time. My years in the Marines had taught me about standing my ground, about defending what was right, even when it was difficult. This wasn't a war zone, but it was my home, and my peace was worth fighting for. I composed a careful, polite, yet firm email to the HOA general address, copying Brenda directly. I cited the specific section she referenced, explained why my porch swing did not fall under its purview, and reiterated my commitment to being a respectful and compliant neighbor. I concluded by stating that I believed the demand was erroneous and that I had no intention of removing my swing. The response was swift, arriving in my inbox less than an hour later. It was from Brenda, and it was icy. The subject line read, your non-compliance. She dismissed my arguments as misguided interpretations, reiterated the $500 fine and daily charges, and then added a new, infuriating demand. Because my porch swing was such a visible and persistent violation, and because my defiance was disruptive to the harmonious visual continuity of the neighborhood, I was to cease all activities on the front porch that contribute to its unapproved status. She didn't explicitly say, leave your porch, but the implication was clear: don't use the swing, and frankly, don't use the porch if you can't conform. She concluded with a chilling line. Your continued presence on the porch under these circumstances will be viewed as a further act of rebellion against the established community order. We advise you to reconsider your stance before irreversible actions are initiated. Irreversible actions. The phrase echoed in my mind. For the first time, I felt a prickle of genuine anger. This wasn't about rules, it was about power. It was about Brenda Sterling wanting absolute control, even over how I enjoyed my own private property. She wanted to dictate my moments of peace, the very reason I had moved here. I looked out at my quiet porch, at the swing that now felt like a battleground. I took a deep breath, and a cold, quiet determination settled over me. I wasn't going to remove that swing. And I was going to sit on that porch, every single day. This was my home, and no HOA Karen was going to tell me to leave my own porch. This was far from over. Brenda's chilling email, with its veiled threats and audacious demands about my porch use, had hardened something inside me. The peaceful calm I'd sought in Willow Creek was now marred by a simmering indignation. I still sat on my porch swing every evening, a defiant act that brought me a strange sense of satisfaction. I wasn't going to let a petty tyrant dictate how I lived in my own home. I was David Peterson, a former Marine, and I had faced down far more formidable bullies than Brenda Sterling. Yet, her words about irreversible actions lingered, a tiny, annoying buzz in the back of my mind. I didn't know what her next move would be, but I knew she would make one. My act of defiance didn't go unnoticed. I'd see Brenda's luxury sedan cruise slowly past my house, her head turning sharply towards my porch, her expression unreadable behind the tinted windows. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring from her own meticulously manicured lawn across the street, a faint scowl etched on her face. Other times, I noticed neighbors, usually those Brenda seemed to influence, giving me shorter waves, or even avoiding eye contact as they walked past. The once warm, quiet hum of Willow Creek was beginning to feel a little colder, a little more watchful. This tension, however, was quickly overshadowed by a new, more immediate concern that tested my empathy and kindness. It started subtly, with a small yelp I heard one afternoon. I was in my garage, sanding down a piece of wood for a new shelf, when the sound drifted over from the house next door. It belonged to the Millers, a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, who had 2 children, a quiet boy named Kevin, about 8 years old, and his younger sister, Lily, who couldn't have been more than 5. They were nice enough, polite and reserved, but I hadn't really gotten to know them beyond polite greetings. The yelp was followed by a sharp, angry voice, Mr. Miller's, and then a child's sob. My stomach tightened. It wasn't the first time I'd heard raised voices from their house, but the distress in the child's cry was new. I tried to shake it off. It wasn't my business. Every family had their arguments, their bad days. But as the days turned into a week, the incidents became more frequent and harder to ignore. The angry shouts from Mr. Miller became louder, more aggressive, often directed at the children. Mrs. Miller's voice, when heard, was usually pleading or tearful. And the children's cries, particularly Lily's, became a more common soundtrack to my afternoons. It was heartbreaking to hear. Lily, a tiny wisp of a girl with bright, curious eyes, often played alone in their small backyard, drawing with chalk on the patio. She reminded me of my own younger sister. Hearing her distress, knowing I was just a few feet away, felt like a betrayal of the peace I had sought. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, a loud crash echoed from next door, followed by a piercing scream from Lily. My instincts flared, the protective surge I'd learned in the Marines kicking in. I couldn't just stand by. I walked to my back door, my hand on the knob, hesitant. What right did I have to interfere? What if it was nothing? What if I made it worse? But then I heard Mr. Miller's voice, a chilling roar, "Get back in there, you little brat." My decision was made. I stepped out onto my porch, slowly, deliberately. Their backyard was mostly visible from my vantage point. The back door of their house was open a crack, and I could see Lily huddled on the ground, whimpering, a broken toy car near her hand. Mr. Miller stood over her, his face red, his fists clenched. Mrs. Miller was trying to pull him back, her face streaked with tears. "Everything all right over here?" I called out, my voice calm but firm, trying to project a sense of casual concern, not accusation. Mr. Miller's head snapped up. His eyes, already inflamed with anger, narrowed when he saw me. He quickly composed himself, a forced smile twisting his features. "Just a little, domestic squabble, Mr. Peterson. Nothing for you to worry about." He still loomed over Lily, who seemed to shrink further into herself. "Sounds like more than a squabble," I replied, not backing down. "Is Lily okay?" Mrs. Miller, her voice trembling, finally spoke up. "She's fine, David. Just had a fall." But her eyes, wide and fearful, told a different story. Mr. Miller shot her a silencing glare. I nodded slowly, letting my gaze linger on Lily for a moment, trying to convey a silent message of support. "All right then," I said, my voice still level. "Just checking. Heard some noise and wanted to make sure everyone was safe." I waited a beat, holding his gaze, letting him know I was watching. Finally, he turned and, with a last angry look at his wife and child, stomped back inside. Mrs. Miller quickly ushered Lily indoors, closing the door firmly. I lingered on my porch for a few minutes more, listening, before heading back inside. The incident left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had intervened, but had I really helped? I felt helpless. I knew I couldn't ignore it, but I also knew direct confrontation might not be the best approach. My thoughts were consumed by Lily's small, vulnerable figure, and the anger in her father's eyes. The next day, as I was leaving for groceries, I saw Lily playing in her front yard, drawing a colorful, fantastical creature on the sidewalk with chalk. She looked up and saw me. For a moment, she seemed hesitant, then a small, tentative smile appeared on her face. I smiled back, a genuine, warm smile. "That's a fantastic drawing, Lily." I called out. Her smile widened. "What is it?" "It's a dream monster," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her eyes brightened. "A dream monster? That sounds incredible," I replied. "Does it eat bad dreams?" She nodded enthusiastically. "And helps good ones grow." "That's a very important job," I said, genuinely impressed by her imagination. "Keep up the good work, Lily." As I walked away, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, a little bit of kindness could make a difference. I made a silent promise to myself. I would find a way to help Lily, and Kevin, without escalating the situation into something more dangerous. I would watch, I would listen, and I would be ready. Meanwhile, Brenda's irreversible actions began to manifest. The first sign came in the form of a heavily inflated invoice for the $500 fine for the porch swing, complete with a new, exorbitant daily non-compliance fee of $100 for each of the 3 days since her last email. The total demanded was $800. It wasn't just a fine. It was a clear attempt to punish me, to drain my resources, to make my life miserable until I capitulated. I stared at the bill, a lump forming in my throat. This was more than just petty, it felt like financial harassment. I called the HOA office, a number listed at the bottom of the invoice. A polite but firm secretary answered. When I explained my dispute regarding the fine, she put me on hold for a moment. When she returned, her voice was noticeably colder. Mr. Peterson, the board has reviewed your case. The charges stand. Payment is due within 7 days. Further inquiries should be directed to the HOA's legal counsel, Mr. Wallace. She gave me a name and a number, and then abruptly hung up. I tried calling Mr. Wallace. He was a slick, confident lawyer, his voice oozing professional politeness, but his words were like venom. Mr. Peterson, he began without preamble, I understand you have an issue with the compliance notice. Let me be clear. The Willow Creek Estates HOA, under the guidance of its esteemed president, Ms. Sterling, has determined your porch swing to be in direct violation of Section 4.3.b. This is not open for interpretation or negotiation. Your options are simple: pay the fine and remove the fixture, or face escalation. We are prepared to file a formal complaint with the county, pursue a lien on your property, and should it come to it, obtain a court order for the forced removal of the item, with all associated costs, including our legal fees, being your responsibility. These fees, I assure you, will far exceed the current fine. He paused, letting his words sink in. I suggest you consider your position very carefully, Mr. Peterson. This board does not tolerate dissent, especially when it impacts the property values and visual integrity of the community. He spoke with an almost rehearsed calm, as if he'd had this conversation countless times, always with the same outcome. He clearly expected me to cave. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. Mr. Wallace, I said, my voice low and steady, I believe the HOA is misinterpreting its own bylaws, and frankly, engaging in harassment. My porch swing is not a permanent alteration. It's outdoor furniture. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. That is your opinion, Mr. Peterson. Our legal opinion, and the board's, differs. The rules are clear: any alteration or addition to the exterior which deviates from the original approved plans or impacts community aesthetics must be submitted for board approval. Your swing was not submitted. It impacts aesthetics. Therefore, it is unauthorized. The law, Mr. Peterson, supports the HOA's right to enforce its covenants. Unless you wish to embark on a lengthy, expensive, and ultimately futile legal battle, I advise you to comply. He then informed me that any further communication should go through him, and ended the call, just as abruptly as the secretary had. The conversation left me shaken, not because I feared the legal battle, but because it felt so incredibly unfair. I was a single man against a well-funded HOA with a dedicated, aggressive lawyer. My dream of peace was turning into a nightmare of bureaucratic warfare. The fines were already piling up, and the threat of a lien on my new home was serious. I knew I couldn't just pay them, that would be admitting defeat, and worse, it would empower Brenda to continue her petty tyranny. But fighting them would be a financial drain, and a huge emotional one. It felt like being caught between a rock and a hard place. My frustration simmered, slowly turning into a quiet rage. I thought about my time in the Marines. We didn't back down. We analyzed the situation, weighed the risks, and then we acted. But this wasn't a combat zone. This was my home, my sanctuary, being threatened by a woman obsessed with control and a lawyer who saw me as nothing more than a legal fee. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and simmering anger. I avoided the Miller's house, not because I didn't care, but because I felt so consumed by my own battle. Then, one Saturday morning, it happened. A new HOA notice, affixed directly to my front door with strong adhesive, not tucked into the mailbox. This wasn't just a letter, it was an official decree, bold and underlined: final notice of violation and intent to commence legal action. Below it, in even larger, menacing font, were the words, "Immediate compliance required. Further non-compliance will result in forced removal." It listed the accumulated fines, now over $1,000, and stated that if the swing was not removed by Tuesday morning, the HOA would send a crew to my property to remove it themselves, with all costs, including damage remediation, billed to me. But it was the last sentence that truly set me off, pushing me past the point of frustration and into outright fury. Additionally, due to your persistent defiance and disruptive presence on the porch, the HOA board has voted to temporarily suspend your privileges to utilize common areas and amenities, effective immediately, until all outstanding violations are rectified. This includes, but is not limited to, the community pool, clubhouse, and any public-facing areas of your property deemed a nuisance. The words, "public-facing areas of your property deemed a nuisance," stood out like a flashing red light. It wasn't just about the swing anymore. It was about me. They were trying to tell me I couldn't even sit on my own porch, that my very presence there was a problem. Brenda had found her loophole, her way to effectively tell me to leave my own porch. I stared at the notice, my vision blurring with rage. They were trying to revoke my right to exist peacefully on my own property. They were trying to break me. My hands balled into fists, trembling with the intensity of my anger. This wasn't just about a porch swing, it was about my fundamental right to my home, my peace, my autonomy. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I was a Marine. We didn't break. We didn't surrender. I crumpled the notice in my hand, feeling the cheap paper tear under my grip. I needed a plan. A proper, tactical plan. And I needed backup. It was time to call in some favors. I knew exactly who to call. My Marine brothers. The crumpled, final notice lay on my kitchen counter, a stark symbol of Brenda Sterling's relentless campaign. My initial fury had cooled, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. They wanted a fight? They were going to get one. But this wouldn't be a messy brawl, it would be a strategic engagement. My Marine training had taught me the importance of reconnaissance, planning, and overwhelming force. My first call was to Sergeant Major Thomas Big T O'Connell. Big T was more than a former superior, he was a mentor, a rock, a man whose loyalty ran deeper than any regulation. He was the kind of person who could make mountains move with a single, gravelly word. He answered on the second ring, his voice as gruff and comforting as I remembered. "Peterson? Didn't think you'd be calling unless you were in a bind." I briefly explained the situation, trying to keep my voice even, but the underlying frustration was evident. "They're trying to find me out of my house," Big T, threatening to take away my property rights. "And they told me I can't even sit on my own porch anymore. It's ridiculous." There was a moment of silence on the line, then a low chuckle that rumbled like distant thunder. "Can't sit on your own porch, huh? That's a new one. Sounds like these folks need a proper education in civilian-military relations." His tone grew serious. "All right, kid. Give me the details. Names, addresses, what kind of legal counsel they're sporting. And don't worry about a thing. You got brothers looking out for you." Big T promised to bring along a couple of other Marines, men I knew and trusted implicitly, Jackson, Jax Miller and Kevin Ghost Rodriguez. Jax was a quiet giant, a master of observation and logistics, with a calm demeanor that hid a razor-sharp mind. Ghost was nimble, intelligent, and fiercely protective, with a knack for cutting through bureaucracy like a hot knife through butter. Just hearing their names brought a wave of relief. My personal battle was about to become a collective mission. While I waited for my reinforcements, my attention was unexpectedly drawn back to the Millers next door. The sounds of distress from their house had escalated. The previous evening, I had heard a prolonged, muffled shouting match, followed by a sickening thud, and then Lily's terrified cries. My heart had pounded in my chest. I wanted to storm over there, but I knew I couldn't act rashly. I had to be smart. The next morning, as I puttered in my garden, I saw Mrs. Miller come out to water her plants. Her face was pale, and she moved slowly, stiffly. Her arm was wrapped around her middle, and when she raised her hand to brush hair from her face, I noticed a dark bruise blooming on her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a domestic squabble. This was serious. I decided to try a different approach. As she turned to go back inside, I called out softly, "Good morning, Mrs. Miller. Lovely day for gardening." She flinched, then turned, a forced smile on her face. "Good morning, David." "Yes, it is." "Rough night?" I asked, my voice gentle, nodding subtly towards her arm without directly staring. "I heard some noise. Everything all right?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear and shame passing through them. She quickly pulled her sleeve down further. "Oh, no, nothing, just. Kevin had a bad dream. He knocked over his nightstand. Just a clumsy accident." Her voice was high, strained, and unconvincing. I maintained eye contact, letting her know I wasn't fooled, but also trying to convey empathy, not judgment. "Mrs. Miller," I said, stepping a little closer, lowering my voice. "Look, I don't mean to pry, but, if you ever need anything, anything at all, just know that I'm here. Seriously. No questions asked. Just a neighbor wanting to help out." I left it at that, a clear offer of support without putting her on the spot. I didn't want to make her feel cornered, especially if Mr. Miller was nearby. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face, as if trying to decipher my sincerity. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod, barely visible, was her only response before she quickly retreated inside, closing the door softly behind her. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a crack in the wall. I hoped she understood the offer was real. I would keep an eye on them, of course. My promise to Lily still stood. The very next day, a shiny black Ford Expedition, meticulously clean and looking far more formidable than a typical suburban SUV, pulled into my driveway. Big T, Jax, and Ghost stepped out. They were exactly as I remembered them, powerful, confident, and radiating an unspoken strength that filled my quiet street. Big T, with his imposing frame and kind eyes, was the first to clap me on the shoulder, his grip firm. "Peterson. Good to see you, son. Even if it's under these unusual circumstances." Jax gave a silent nod, his gaze already sweeping the neighborhood, assessing. Ghost, ever the one for details, immediately noticed the crumpled final notice still on my counter. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the aggressive language. "Well, this is certainly charming," he murmured, a dangerous edge to his voice. We spent the rest of the day in my living room, spreading out the HOA rulebook, the notices, the invoices, and my attempts at correspondence across my coffee table. It felt like a mission briefing. Big T listened intently, occasionally grunting, his gaze unwavering. Jax methodically cross-referenced dates and clauses, highlighting inconsistencies. Ghost, meanwhile, took notes, his fingers flying across his phone, already researching HOA laws in the state, looking for precedents, for weaknesses in their legal standing. "All right, Peterson," Big T finally rumbled, leaning back in the armchair, which seemed to shrink beneath him. "Here's what we got. This Brenda character, she's drunk on power. And this lawyer, Wallace, he's a shark, but he's just following orders. They're trying to intimidate you, to wear you down with threats and financial pressure. Classic bully tactics. They assume you're just some quiet veteran who won't fight back." He paused, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. "They're about to be very, very wrong." Ghost looked up from his phone. "Sir, I've found a few things. Firstly, the permanent fixture argument is shaky at best. A porch swing, especially one that's designed to be hung with hooks, is generally considered removable furniture, not a structural alteration. Secondly, the disruptive presence clause they're quoting for suspending privileges to public-facing areas of your property, that's highly questionable. An HOA can restrict common areas, but interfering with a homeowner's use of their own property, especially a porch, is a massive overreach, bordering on unconstitutional in a homeowners association context. Jax added, they've also been extremely selective in their enforcement. I did a quick drive-by this morning while you were getting coffee. Old Man Johnson down the street has a bright pink flamingo display that lights up at night. And I saw at least 3 other houses with various, unapproved, lawn ornaments or unpainted sheds. This isn't about rules, it's about targeting you specifically, Peterson. Big T nodded. Exactly. This is personal for Brenda. And that makes her sloppy. We'll leverage that. Our goal isn't just to win this, but to make sure she never tries this kind of stunt again. We're going to expose her overreach, and we're going to do it publicly. Our plan began to take shape. It was multifaceted, designed to hit Brenda and the HOA from multiple angles: legal, financial, and public relations. First, Ghost would draft a meticulously detailed letter, citing specific state HOA statutes, case law, and the inconsistencies in their own bylaws, refuting their claims point by point and threatening a countersuit for harassment and selective enforcement if they continued. This letter wouldn't just be sent to the HOA. It would be carbon copied to every board member, the HOA management company, and even a few key real estate agents in the area, ensuring maximum visibility within the community's power structure. We hit them with facts and legal precedent, Ghost explained. Make them realize we're not just some civilian they can push around. We speak their language, but with more authority. Next, Jax would begin compiling a dossier on Brenda Sterling. If she's this obsessed with control, Jax reasoned, there's bound to be a paper trail. Other complaints? Past grievances? Any ethical violations in her role as president? He intended to use open-source intelligence, public records, and perhaps even some discreet inquiries with long-term residents. Big T's role, he announced with a glint in his eye, would be the physical presence. These kinds of people, they thrive on intimidation. They see a quiet guy like you, Peterson, and think they can walk all over him. We need to change that perception. We need to be visible. We need to be undeniable. And we need to be there for the show. He outlined his plan for the following Tuesday morning, the day the HOA crew was scheduled to arrive to remove my porch swing. They're coming here expecting to intimidate you into compliance. They're expecting to roll over you. We're going to greet them. Not with aggression, but with an unshakable presence. A message that you are not alone, and that messing with you means messing with us. I felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with a profound sense of gratitude. These men, my brothers, were dropping everything to help me fight a battle that, to most, would seem trivial. But to them, it was about loyalty, about standing up for what was right, and about defending one of their own. As we finalized our strategy, a distant siren wailed, growing louder, closer. It was an ambulance. My mind immediately leaped to the Millers. The sound stopped abruptly, right in front of their house. My heart pounded. I exchanged a look with Big T. He simply nodded. Go, Peterson. We'll handle this. I rushed out, my Marine brothers right behind me. A police car had just pulled up, lights flashing, followed by the ambulance. 2 paramedics were already rushing towards the Millers' front door, which was ajar. A police officer was speaking to a visibly shaken neighbor, Mrs. Albright, who lived across the street. Her face was pale, and she was wringing her hands. What happened? I asked, my voice tight with dread. Mrs. Albright turned, her eyes wide with fear and distress. It's the Millers. I heard terrible shouting, worse than usual. And then I heard Lily scream. And Mr. Miller. He just stormed out of the house, got in his car, and sped off. Mrs. Miller called 911. Oh, it was awful, David. Truly awful. Just then, paramedics emerged from the house, carefully helping Mrs. Miller, who was leaning heavily on them. Her face was swollen, one eye already beginning to purple, and her lip was split. She was clutching her arm protectively, trying to hide it, but I could see the fresh, angry red mark beneath her sleeve, along with the fading bruise from days earlier. She looked utterly broken. Behind her, one of the paramedics was carrying a small, blanket-wrapped bundle. It was Lily. Her face was tear-stained and swollen, her eyes closed, and her small body seemed to tremble even as she was carefully carried. She looked so tiny, so vulnerable. Kevin, the older boy, stood beside the door, his face pale and blotchy, staring at his mother and sister with vacant eyes. He looked like a ghost. My blood ran cold. This was far beyond a domestic squabble. This was abuse. Serious, undeniable harm. And I had waited. I felt a surge of self-recrimination, a sickening wave of guilt. I should have acted sooner, pushed harder, demanded more. As they gently placed Mrs. Miller on a stretcher, her eyes met mine. They were filled with pain, but also a desperate plea. She didn't have to say anything. I understood. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that my fight with Brenda and the HOA, though important, suddenly felt very, very small compared to what was happening next door. My priorities had just shifted dramatically. This was no longer just about my porch, it was about protecting the innocent. And I would bring every ounce of my Marine training, every bit of the loyalty and strength of my brothers, to bear on this new, terrifying enemy. The sight of Mrs. Miller's bruised face and Lily's trembling, small body being carried into the ambulance solidified a new mission for me. My battle with Brenda and the HOA, while infuriating, suddenly paled in comparison to the very real and immediate danger unfolding next door. My Marine brothers, witnessing the grim scene alongside me, understood implicitly. Big T, ever the leader, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Peterson," he rumbled, his voice low and serious, "this is what we train for. Real threats. Not just petty rules. We'll handle this. All of us." Jax, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by a steely intensity, spoke with surprising vehemence. "That man needs to be held accountable. No one touches a woman or a child like that." Ghost, who had been observing the police and paramedics, already had his phone out, discreetly taking pictures of the scene, gathering information. "I'll start digging into Mr. Miller. See what we can find out about his history." The immediate aftermath was chaotic. The police interviewed Mrs. Albright, who, despite her fear, recounted what she had witnessed. Mrs. Miller was taken to the hospital, and a social worker arrived to speak with Kevin, who remained silent, his eyes wide and distant. I saw the social worker trying to coax words out of him, but the boy seemed frozen, utterly terrified. It broke my heart. The police officer, a young man named Officer Miller, no relation, thankfully, eventually approached me. He had seen me talking to Mrs. Miller earlier. "Mr. Peterson, you live next door. Did you see or hear anything before the ambulance arrived?" I recounted what I had heard, the increasing shouts, the thud, Lily's scream, and finally, Mr. Miller speeding away. I carefully mentioned the prior instances of loud arguments and my earlier attempt to offer help to Mrs. Miller. I made sure to point out her injuries and Lily's distress. "I've been concerned for their safety for a while now, officer," I stated, my voice firm. "It sounds like this has been going on for some time." Officer Miller nodded, taking notes. "We appreciate your cooperation, sir. We'll follow up with Mrs. Miller at the hospital." Social services will be involved for the children. This is a serious matter. While the authorities handled the immediate crisis, my brothers and I reconvened. Big T took charge. All right, team. Phase 1 of the HOA problem is on hold. This is priority 1. Our focus shifts to the Miller situation. Peterson, you're the eyes and ears on the ground. Jax, Ghost, you're on intel and support. Ghost immediately started researching local domestic violence resources, child protective services protocols, and legal avenues for restraining orders. He also began a deeper dive into Mr. Miller's background, pulling up public records, social media profiles, and any news articles associated with his name. We need to build a comprehensive picture, Ghost explained, so we can provide the authorities with everything they need to ensure he doesn't slip through the cracks. Jax, meanwhile, volunteered to stake out the house, discreetly observing any visitors or suspicious activity. If Mr. Miller comes back, we need to know. And if he tries to intimidate Mrs. Miller or the kids, he'll have a very rude awakening. My role was to maintain a presence, to be a reassuring figure for Kevin if he returned home, and to be ready to offer direct support to Mrs. Miller when she was able. The kindness and empathy I wanted to embody in this new civilian life were now being tested in the most profound way. It wasn't just about good deeds, it was about protection. The hours crawled by. Mrs. Miller was discharged from the hospital later that evening, escorted by a social worker. She looked even more fragile than before. Kevin was with her, clinging to her hand. They walked past my house, their heads down. I stepped onto my porch. Mrs. Miller, I called softly. She looked up, startled. Her good eye was puffy, but she managed a weak, almost imperceptible smile. I'm so sorry you're going through this, I said, my voice full of genuine concern. Please, if there's anything at all, you just knock. Day or night. My door is open. She nodded again, a single tear tracing a path down her bruised cheek. Thank you, David, she whispered, her voice hoarse. It was the most I had heard her say in weeks. It was a small opening, but it was something. The next day, as the community slowly awoke to the grim reality of what had happened, a new kind of tension settled over Willow Creek. People talked in hushed tones, glancing towards the Miller house. The incident had shaken the perfectly manicured facade of the neighborhood. And in the midst of this, Brenda Sterling, ever vigilant, saw an opportunity. She didn't show up at the Miller house. She didn't offer sympathy or assistance. Instead, I saw her, perched on her porch swing, observing the comings and goings, her expression a mix of curiosity and something else, something cold and calculating. Later that afternoon, a familiar crisp, official envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one wasn't from the HOA directly, but from Mr. Wallace, the HOA lawyer. My heart sank, realizing Brenda was pressing her advantage. The letter was short, brutal, and utterly without empathy. It stated that due to recent incidents of social disturbance and police presence within the immediate vicinity of Mr. David Peterson's property, creating an undeniable negative impact on community serenity and property values, the HOA board had convened an emergency meeting. They had voted to levy an additional disruption fee of $1,000 against my property, effective immediately. Furthermore, it explicitly stated that my porch swing was to be removed that very day to alleviate any further visual or social nuisance contributing to the neighborhood's current unrest. If not, the forced removal would proceed, now with increased security, and all associated costs would be quadrupled due to the exacerbated nature of the violation and the additional security required. It was clear. Brenda was linking the Miller incident to me, twisting it to justify her agenda and further punish me for my defiance. She was using a family's tragedy as leverage in her petty war. My blood ran cold with a new kind of fury. This wasn't just harassment, it was despicable. To exploit such a sensitive situation for her own gain, to blame me, even indirectly, for a domestic violence incident, it was beyond the pale. My personal fight with the HOA was no longer just about a porch swing, it was about standing up to a truly morally bankrupt individual. I called Big T, my voice tight with controlled rage. Brenda just sent another letter. She's blaming me for the Miller incident, using it to justify more fines and force the swing removal today. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. Then, Big T's voice, usually a rumble, became a low, dangerous growl. She's doing what? Blaming you for that? Using a family's suffering to push her petty agenda? That woman just crossed a line she shouldn't have even seen from orbit, Peterson. She just lit the fuse. She's trying to strong-arm me into removing the swing today, I repeated, my grip on the phone tightening. Threatening to bring a crew with increased security. Today, huh? Big T mused, a chilling calm in his tone. Well, that simplifies things. Jax, Ghost, you heard that? Change of plans. We're on for this afternoon. We're going to give Ms. Sterling a very special welcome committee. The kind that delivers on titles, David. The kind she won't soon forget. He paused, and then added, Peterson, remember that highest peak you mentioned in our first chat? The one where she regretted everything? Well, it's about to happen. And she has no idea what's coming. I looked at the crumpled notice again, then at my porch swing, which suddenly felt less like a symbol of peace and more like a challenge. The stage was set. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky with fiery streaks of orange and red, mirroring the inferno brewing inside me. I was ready. Brenda Sterling was about to face the true force of my Marine brothers, and she would learn that some lines, once crossed, have permanent consequences. This was no longer just about a porch. This was about justice. Tuesday morning dawned under a sky the color of bruised plums, mirroring the mood of anticipation that hung heavy in my home. The air, usually filled with the gentle sounds of suburban awakening, felt charged, almost silent. My porch swing, the center of this ridiculous dispute, felt less like a piece of furniture and more like a symbol, a line drawn in the sand. I had spent a restless night, not just thinking about Brenda, but about Lily and Mrs. Miller, and the promise I had made to protect them. My Marine brothers, Big T, Jax, and Ghost, had arrived at my house before sunrise, their presence a solid, comforting weight in the tense atmosphere. We shared coffee, the silence punctuated by the clinking of mugs and the occasional quiet rustle of paper as Ghost reviewed his legal notes one last time. Just after 9 o'clock, a white van with Willow Creek Estates Maintenance emblazoned on its side slowly rolled down the street and pulled up directly in front of my house. Behind it, a smaller, unmarked black sedan, its windows tinted, also parked. My jaw tightened. Brenda wasn't just sending a maintenance crew, she was sending a security detail, as promised, a clear attempt at intimidation. Two men, burly and stern-faced, emerged from the van, carrying toolboxes and a large ladder. They wore matching uniforms, their expressions grim, clearly here to do a job they likely didn't enjoy. From the black sedan, another man stepped out. He was sharply dressed in a dark suit, his face unsmiling, a Bluetooth earpiece subtly tucked into his ear. This was undoubtedly Mr. Wallace, the HOA lawyer, here to oversee the forced removal. He was the kind of man who enjoyed watching others squirm. Big T, who had been standing by my living room window, simply nodded. Showtime, Peterson. I stepped out onto my porch, my posture relaxed but firm, projecting an air of calm authority I had learned in the Corps. Big T, Jax, and Ghost followed, fanning out slightly behind me, their collective presence radiating a quiet power that seemed to ripple through the morning air. They didn't stand aggressively, but their stillness, their focused gazes, spoke volumes. They were three formidable men, not easily dismissed, and their unspoken message was clear: this man is not alone. The maintenance crew stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes widening as they took in the assembled group on my porch. Mr. Wallace, meanwhile, seemed to falter mid-stride, his confident smirk faltering. He clearly hadn't anticipated an audience, let alone this kind of audience. His eyes darted from me to Big T, then to Jax, then to Ghost, a flicker of confusion, then annoyance, playing across his features. "Mr. Peterson, Mr. Wallace began, recovering quickly, his voice still smooth but with a new, forced edge, "I trust you received the final notice. We are here to enforce the HOA bylaws and remove the unauthorized fixture. Any interference will be met with legal action." He gestured vaguely towards my porch swing, then gave a curt nod to the maintenance men, urging them forward. Before they could take another step, Big T's deep voice boomed, cutting through the morning silence like a thunderclap. It wasn't a shout, but a low, resonant rumble that commanded immediate attention. "Hold it right there, counsel." Mr. Wallace turned, his eyes narrowing, clearly irritated by the interruption. "And who might you be?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. Big T took a slow, deliberate step forward, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the lawyer. "Sergeant Major Thomas O'Connell, formerly United States Marine Corps. These are my associates, Sergeant Miller and Sergeant Rodriguez. And we're here to ensure due process is observed." His gaze was unwavering, direct, and utterly unblinking. It was the kind of look that made people uncomfortable, a silent promise of consequences. Mr. Wallace visibly stiffened. He hadn't expected military titles, or the sheer physical presence these men exuded. "This is a private HOA matter," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "It has nothing to do with military personnel." Ghost stepped forward then, a folder appearing in his hand as if from nowhere. His voice was calm, almost scholarly, but laced with an undeniable steel. "On the contrary, Mr. Wallace. As legal representatives of Mr. Peterson, we believe this is a clear case of selective enforcement, harassment, and an egregious overreach of HOA authority, bordering on an unconstitutional violation of property rights. We have meticulously documented every communication, every notice, and every instance of what appears to be targeted harassment against Mr. Peterson, culminating in this unlawful attempt to remove his personal property." He opened the folder, revealing a thick stack of papers. "Furthermore," Ghost continued, his voice picking up speed, "we have already initiated a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding the HOA's alleged abuse of power and discriminatory practices. We have also prepared a countersuit seeking damages for emotional distress, financial harassment, and a permanent injunction against the HOA for any future attempts to interfere with Mr. Peterson's property or his right to peaceful enjoyment of his home." He closed the folder with a crisp snap. "And should you proceed with this forced removal, we will immediately file for an emergency restraining order and pursue additional charges for trespass and property damage. The costs of which, I assure you, will make your current legal fees look like a parking ticket." Mr. Wallace's face went from pale to ashen. His eyes, which had been dismissive, now darted wildly between the three Marines, then to the folder in Ghost's hand. He knew the legal system, he understood the weight of the words Ghost had just spoken. An Attorney General complaint, a countersuit, restraining orders, and charges of trespass. This wasn't the simple intimidation tactic he had planned. This was a full-blown legal war, one he hadn't anticipated, and one that promised to be very, very expensive for the HOA. The maintenance crew, witnessing this unexpected turn of events, looked even more uncomfortable, shifting their weight, clearly wanting no part of this escalating confrontation. Just then, Brenda Sterling herself pulled up in her shining SUV, gliding to a stop just behind the maintenance van. She must have been watching from afar, waiting for her moment to sweep in and relish my humiliation. She stepped out, a triumphant smirk already forming on her face, her eyes fixed on my porch. She saw me, saw the maintenance crew, and then her gaze shifted to the unfamiliar men standing with me. Her smirk faltered. She walked purposefully towards the group, her posture radiating her usual self-importance. "What is the meaning of this delay, Mr. Wallace?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I distinctly said the removal was to be immediate. Are we having a problem here?" Her eyes fixed on Big T, a challenging glint in them. "And who are these individuals?" Mr. Wallace, clearly flustered, cleared his throat. "Ms. Sterling, these are Mr. Peterson's counsel. They've just informed us of some, rather significant legal developments." He sounded hesitant, something I'd never heard from him before. Brenda scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Legal developments? Nonsense. This is simply delaying the inevitable. Mr. Peterson has been defiant for weeks. These men are clearly just trying to intimidate us." She turned her sharp gaze directly on me. "Mr. Peterson, I gave you a final warning. Your porch swing is coming down. And due to your continued obstinacy, you are still forbidden from using any public-facing areas of your property, effective immediately. Get off that porch." She pointed a manicured finger directly at me, her voice dripping with venom, fully expecting me to cower. The words, "get off that porch," hung in the air, echoing the exact phrasing from her malicious letter. This was it. The moment she had pushed too far. Before I could even respond, Big T took another step forward, placing himself squarely between Brenda and me. His shadow completely enveloped her. He didn't raise his voice, but his words, delivered in a low, dangerous rumble, cut through her arrogance like a surgical blade. "Miss Sterling," he began, his eyes locking onto hers, "I think you misunderstand the situation. Mr. Peterson, as a decorated former United States Marine, has defended his country from far greater threats than an overzealous HOA president. He has earned the right to peace and quiet in his own home. And he certainly doesn't take orders from you, especially not on his own property." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it somehow carried, filling the unnerving silence. "You told him to leave his porch. You blamed him for a domestic tragedy in the neighborhood, a tragedy that your HOA has done nothing to address. You've attempted to exploit a family's suffering for your own petty power play. That's not just a violation of bylaws, Ms. Sterling. That's a violation of human decency. And frankly, it's disgusting." Brenda's face, which had been a mask of imperious anger, slowly began to crumple. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and a dawning terror, darted towards the other neighbors who had started to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. She saw Mrs. Albright, tears still evident in her eyes, watching with quiet intensity. She saw other faces, some curious, some disapproving, all observing her moment of public humiliation. "And as for these individuals," Big T continued, gesturing towards Jax and Ghost, "we are his brothers. Brothers in arms. And when you mess with one of us, Ms. Sterling, you mess with all of us." His voice was calm, but the unspoken threat in his eyes was palpable. Jax and Ghost stood silently, their expressions unreadable, their gazes fixed on Brenda. Their collective presence was like an immovable wall, a force she had never encountered, a force that utterly dwarfed her petty authority. Brenda Sterling, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, who had reveled in intimidation and control, suddenly looked very, very small. The color drained from her face entirely, leaving her looking sickly. Her jaw hung slack, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, fear, and a dawning, terrible regret. She had pushed, and now she had stumbled upon something she couldn't control, something far beyond her carefully constructed world of rules and fines. Her perfect, manicured world, built on intimidation and fear, was crumbling around her. She had told me to leave my porch. And she regretted it. Terribly. The silent, powerful presence of my Marine brothers, standing firm, unwavering, made that much abundantly clear. The showdown had begun, but the consequences for Brenda, and the path forward for the Millers, were only just starting to unfold. Brenda Sterling stood frozen, her carefully constructed composure shattered by the unwavering gaze of Big T and the silent, formidable presence of Jax and Ghost. Her lawyer, Mr. Wallace, looked equally stunned, his professional demeanor evaporating under the weight of the unexpected legal and physical counter-assault. The maintenance crew, tools still in hand, simply stood motionless, clearly wanting no part of the unfolding drama. This was not the quick, easy intimidation they had been hired for. I don't understand, Brenda stammered, her voice thin and reedy, completely devoid of its usual authority. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for a way to regain control. But there was none. The neighbors who had emerged were watching intently, their expressions a mix of curiosity and quiet satisfaction. The show was not what Brenda had intended, but it was certainly a show. Big T leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a gravelly, almost menacing whisper. What you don't understand, Miss Sterling, is respect. You don't understand decency. You tried to bully a man who risked his life for this country, a man who just wants to live in peace. And then you had the audacity to exploit the suffering of a family you've done nothing to help, to push your own petty agenda. His eyes hardened. That's not how real leaders behave. That's how bullies operate. And bullies, Miss Sterling, always get what's coming to them. Ghost stepped forward, holding up the folder once more. We've already filed the emergency injunction against the forced removal, Miss Sterling. Any attempt to proceed will be a direct violation of a court order and will result in immediate arrest for contempt. Furthermore, the Attorney General's office has been fully briefed on your HOA's pattern of selective enforcement and harassment. I'm sure they'll be very interested in reviewing all your past violations and fines levied against other residents. He glanced pointedly at Mrs. Albright, who immediately nodded, a silent acknowledgement that she had her own stories to tell. The color drained from Brenda's face. The mention of the Attorney General, and the implication of an audit into her past actions, hit her harder than any physical threat. Her carefully guarded kingdom, built on fear and unquestioned authority, was suddenly under siege, not just from me, but from the very system she thought she controlled. Mr. Wallace, sensing the tide had turned irrevocably, wisely interjected. Ms. Sterling, I strongly advise we cease all activity here immediately. This situation has escalated beyond reasonable bounds. We need to consult with legal counsel and review our position. He shot her a look that clearly said, you messed up, and now we're in deep trouble. Brenda, completely deflated, could only nod mutely. Her shoulders slumped. The imperious posture was gone, replaced by a defeated slump. She looked less like a queen and more like a bewildered child who had just been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. She turned, stumbled back to her SUV, and without another word, drove away, leaving a faint smell of burnt rubber in her wake. Mr. Wallace quickly followed, shouting a muffled apology to the maintenance crew before scrambling into his own car. The two maintenance men, looking relieved, quickly packed up their tools and drove off, happy to escape the volatile scene. The immediate threat was gone. A palpable sense of relief swept over me. But the battle was far from over. Later that day, after my brothers and I had celebrated our small victory with some celebratory pizza, Ghost continued his work. He had been digging deeper into Mr. Miller's past, and what he found was chilling. Peterson, Ghost said, his voice grim, Mr. Miller has a history. Several domestic disturbance calls in his previous residences, though none led to arrests or convictions, likely due to Mrs. Miller not pressing charges. And here's the kicker, he has an outstanding warrant in another state for aggravated assault, somehow never flagged during his background checks when he moved here. Also, there are financial irregularities. He seems to have a pattern of taking advantage of vulnerable people. My blood ran cold. This man wasn't just a bully, he was a dangerous individual. We need to get this to Officer Miller immediately, I urged. And ensure Mrs. Miller and the kids are safe. Jax had a plan. I've made contact with a colleague in that other state's police force. We can cross-reference the warrant discreetly, confirm it, and then feed the information directly to Officer Miller, making sure it's undeniable. The next few days were a whirlwind of focused action. Ghost worked tirelessly, compiling an irrefutable dossier on Mr. Miller, cross-referencing everything with his contacts. Jax, using his meticulous observation skills, subtly monitored the Miller house. He confirmed that Mr. Miller had not returned since the incident. Meanwhile, Mrs. Miller and Kevin remained at home, seemingly safe for the moment, but still visibly shaken. I continued to make small gestures of kindness, leaving a plate of freshly baked cookies on their porch, offering to mow their lawn, things that showed support without being intrusive. I knew I had to be patient, earn Mrs. Miller's trust. The breakthrough came a week later. Ghost confirmed the outstanding warrant for Mr. Miller's arrest in his former state, relating to a serious assault charge that had never been resolved due to a technicality. Armed with this undeniable evidence, I personally met with Officer Miller, presenting him with Ghost's detailed findings. The officer's eyes widened as he reviewed the documents. "Mr. Peterson," he said, "this is significant. This gives us the leverage we need to act decisively. Thank you." Within hours, an all-points bulletin was issued, and a few days later, we received news: Mr. Miller had been apprehended in a neighboring state attempting to cross into Mexico. He was extradited back to face the outstanding charges. Mrs. Miller, finally feeling safe enough to speak freely, pressed charges for the domestic assault. The community rallied around her, offering support, food, and help. It was a slow process, but Mrs. Miller and the children were finally on the path to healing, free from the constant fear. As for Brenda Sterling and the HOA, the fallout from our confrontation was immediate and severe. The Attorney General's office launched a full investigation into Willow Creek Estates HOA. News of the public confrontation, fueled by discreet leaks from my brothers, spread like wildfire through the community. Neighbors, emboldened by my stand and the undeniable proof of Brenda's corruption, came forward with their own stories of harassment, unfair fines, and selective enforcement. Mrs. Albright bravely recounted her gnome violation. Another resident shared how Brenda had targeted them for a minor paint shade difference on their shutters. Brenda Sterling was forced to resign from the HOA board in disgrace, facing not only legal scrutiny but the utter contempt of the community she had so desperately tried to control. Mr. Wallace, her lawyer, distanced himself from the situation, his reputation tarnished. The HOA itself was put under temporary state supervision, with new, fairer elections scheduled. My porch swing, of course, remained. No one ever dared to question it again. My home in Willow Creek Estates slowly, truly, became the sanctuary I had always dreamed of. The tension that had once hung in the air dissipated, replaced by a genuine sense of camaraderie among the residents. My quiet acts of kindness had resonated, and the extreme stand I had taken against Brenda had united the community. I was no longer just the quiet veteran, I was the neighbor who had stood up for what was right, not just for myself, but for everyone. The Miller family began to heal. Mrs. Miller and I developed a quiet friendship, built on shared understanding and resilience. Kevin and Lily started playing in their yard again, their laughter, once so rare, now a regular, joyful sound that drifted over the fence. Lily even brought me a new dream monster drawing, its colors even brighter, its smile bigger. One sunny afternoon, I sat on my porch swing, sipping iced tea, just as I had on that fateful day. Big T, Jax, and Ghost were there, visiting again. We were talking about something mundane, probably fishing, when Lily's laughter rang out from next door. Mrs. Miller, looking stronger and more at peace than I had ever seen her, waved to me from her garden. I waved back, a genuine, unburdened smile on my face. Big T clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes twinkling. "You know, Peterson," he rumbled, "this quiet life suits you. Who knew a porch swing could cause so much trouble, and then lead to so much good? I chuckled, looking out at the peaceful street, then at my porch swing, then at the happy sounds from next door. I guess some battles are just fought on different grounds, Big T. But they're still worth fighting for. The sun set, painting the sky in soft hues of purple and gold. Willow Creek Estates, once a battleground for a tyrannical HOA president, was finally at peace, a true testament to the power of standing up for kindness, empathy, and the unwavering bonds of brotherhood. It was the wildest ending to my quiet new life I could have ever imagined.